Oral questions by members.
Member for Kelowna Centre.
South Surrey has been trying for years to get an increase in support from Community Living BC. He was recently notified that once again, he's been denied. Meanwhile, the top 5 executives of CLBC account for more than $1.4 million in compensation, not including car allowances. To the Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, how can this be justified when Ryan gets denied over and over again while CLBC executives get overpaid and they underdeliver?
Minister of Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work that was directed by self-advocates and adults with developmental disabilities to create a Crown Corporation called Community Living BC at the time of deinstitutionalization has been an important movement in British Columbia, and I'm grateful that after we amended the legislation last year that we continue to have board members on CLBC that direct the operations. We have families and people with lived experience part of the governance structure. We have this year created a budget lift for CLBC just for some of the issues that the member cites. One of the good news things is that adults with developmental disabilities live much longer, living in community, but the caseload pressure that is felt by almost every social service across Canada is certainly felt in the CLBC community. And so this year's budget lift for direct caseload support was $380 million over 3 years. I look forward to working with the member to make sure that people who are vulnerable and need our support get the care that they need.
Member has supplemental.
Clearly, the minister either doesn't understand the hardship or refuses to be held to account regarding Community Living BC executives. When members in government proudly mention wage increases, they fail to highlight who stands to benefit and who ultimately pays the price. It is our most vulnerable people. Again, to the minister, why are 29% raises more important than CLBC clients?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government takes our responsibilities to keep the most vulnerable people supported and kept safe and governed in the way that they wish. The CLBC executive compensation is something that's directed by the board and is a fraction of the 97% of the budget that goes directly to people who seek care. While I have the opportunity, I'll give a particular thanks to the 4,000 British Columbians who have opened their homes to adults with developmental disabilities that provide home share services, and that we've been continuing to increase their support, and we'll do more.
Thank you. Member for Abbotsford Mission.
Mr. Speaker, Florence Gerard, a woman with Down syndrome, starved to death in a home share program contracted through Community Living BC. The inquest heard testimony that caregivers are underfunded by the Crown Corporation. The caregiver, Astrid Dahl, was convicted in 2022 for failing to provide Gerard with the necessities of life. CLBC failed Florence Gerard, and the coroner's inquest report clearly states that payments to caregivers need to be increased now. How can the minister justify executive pay hikes while freezing client care funds?
Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What happened to Florence Gerard should never have happened. It was a tragedy. That the person responsible for her care was criminally convicted was very important. In the 7 years since her death, Community Living BC has substantially increased monitoring and oversight. We are grateful for the recommendations of the coroner's inquest and the civilians who sat on the coroner's inquest, who investigated what was the supports that were in place in 2018, at the time that Florence Gerard was tragically lost her life in the place that she should have been safe. And I will continue to press Community Living BC to continue to take advice of the coroner's inquest, of the Auditor General, and the voices that we hear from families and people with lived experience to make sure that CLBC always keeps its deep responsibility for safety every day. Thank you.
Abbotsford Mission supplemental.
Speaker, thank you. What has substantially increased is executive compensation. CLBC failed Florence Gerard. When she died, she only weighed 50 pounds. Tiffany Wickham, manager of Crown Corporations, acknowledged that money provided to CLBC caregivers, quote, has not kept up with the rate of inflation or housing costs, end quote. The CLBC structure has failed, and this government has had 8 years to right the wrongs of what has happened on their watch. When will the minister admit that CLBC has failed to deliver, failed their clients, and needs to be completely overhauled?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to offer my deepest condolences to the family of Florence Gerard, and her sister in particular, whose voice during the coroner's inquest this year was so very strong. It's our highest responsibility to keep people safe. CLBC and their service providers have clear policies and protocols in place, and it's my expectation that they are followed. Since Florence Gerard's death in 2018, CLBC has made significant changes to strengthen accountability and safety. Agencies now are required to conduct home visits every 3 months. Clients must have health care planning and doctor visits once a year. There's improved monitoring and oversight systems, along with hiring more staff to monitor outcomes and concerns, and significantly improve training standards and policies for home share providers, including better critical incident tracking. Those are all changes made since Florence's death in 2018, and we will continue to hold CLBC accountable to strengthen their system of safety so that we learn from the tragic death of Florence Gerard.
Leader of the third party. Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In our province and worldwide, the tragedy of social and economic inequality persists, depriving people of hope and opportunity. The gap between rich and poor increased substantially during the early years of COVID and has not eased. In Canada, the poorest 40% of households hold less than 3% of the total wealth. People living paycheck to paycheck continue to struggle with the high and rising cost of living. Mr. Speaker, it's easy to denounce taxes during periods of economic uncertainty, but most low and middle income families have been receiving a reliable source of funds through the carbon tax rebate for years, more than they ever paid in tax. This government says it plans to end the consumer carbon tax and therefore the rebate. So through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Finance, what is their plan to replace it?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you to the member opposite for the question. We've been very clear that when the federal government gets rid of the consumer carbon tax, we too will get rid of the consumer carbon tax, and I'm watching for that legislation and preparing for it. But I do want to speak to the heart of the member's question, which is such an important one. We know that people in British Columbia are struggling with affordability, and we've taken many measures and will continue to take measures to support British Columbians. But let me highlight one. It's so important that we continue with our housing plan. Most people, their largest expense is housing. And I want to share with the member opposite, there was some good news recently. A McGill study showed that some of the actions that we've been taking are having effect. Rents have come down 5.7%, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country, Coldstream. Oh, you didn't stand up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the Chinese Communist Party announced punishing 100% tariffs on Canadian farm and seafood imports. That is 100%. According to the Canadian press, within days, the Premier is asking for, quote, concessions. These tariffs will hit British Columbians in 1 week today. My question is, when will the Premier get off Team China and join Team Canada like the rest of us?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I just have to say that question is absurd. That question is absurd. This side of this House certainly has been advocating for Team Canada since day one. The member will recall we had a vote in this building to see if we can find a way, all of us together, to take the Team Canada approach. But some members of this House decided to vote with the U.S., with the Trump administration, Honourable Speaker. So I reject the question from the member on that basis. But I will say that all tariff threats are being taken seriously, Honourable Speaker. The world right now is going through major shocks, and it started with the Trump administration. The tariffs that they brought on are unjust. They go contrary to the trade agreements that the President of the United States signed himself with Canada, Honourable Speaker. And of course China is going to see advantage in this. And now China is weighing into this as well. And we are in the middle. What's important, Honourable Speaker, is that we will continue to respond, which we have been, and we just had legislation introduced that strengthens that ability. We're going to continue to strengthen our economy. We're going to work for opportunities to diversify. Just yesterday, the Japanese Consul General was here talking about how we can strengthen our relationships with Japan, and we're going to continue to do that work with other jurisdictions as well.
Hear, hear.
Member supplemental.
So here we go on the Trump train again. Anyone else tired of hearing that name in this House? The Premier took U.S. liquor off the shelf, but for some reason has not touched all the tea in China. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier stop capitulating to the communists and remove CCP from the shelves as well?
Minister. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Clearly, the independent members have more support in the Conservative caucus than perhaps we're aware of, Honourable Speaker. I'll just say, Honourable Speaker, that the tariffs that we're seeing from China, the tariffs we're seeing from the United States, it is causing hardship on families in British Columbia and families across Canada. We are deeply concerned about that. And I know the member said that they're tired about hearing about President Trump. Well, I'm sorry. Perhaps they should be paying attention to what's happening right now across Canada. People across Canada want us to take strong action to remind President Trump and the Trump administration that these tariffs are going to hurt families on the U.S. side as well as on Canadian side. This is not what we want to see, Honourable Speaker, but we will continue to stand up, both take action on tariffs from U.S., but we have, as a nation, taken actions on China as well, and we're going to support that across the country as well, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Skeena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend, I walked around Pandora Street for a few hours, and I actually spoke to the people there that want to get clean, that want a chance at a better life. I didn't see hope. I saw people who feel ignored, abandoned, and betrayed. I'd gladly take the Premier or any of his ministers to speak to the very people he claims to support. Giving them time and attention is not a media opportunity. And to the Minister of Housing, poke fun at my efforts all you want. This is not about me. This continues to be about the vulnerable people that we all swore to serve. If the Premier truly believes that his approach is working, I invite him to step outside his office without security and come meet the people that he claims to be helping. So my question is to the Premier, will he take me up on my offer?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I want to thank the member for her question. I think I should start with the premise around the Premier. When the Premier became a lawyer, Many lawyers see, well, I'm going to look for opportunities and make a lot of money. What did the Premier do? He went to the downtown east side and he worked with the most vulnerable people. So to suggest that the Premier wouldn't walk downtown in downtown east side or any community is absurd. It's absolutely absurd, Honourable Speaker. I'll just say to the member, I've been on Pandora Street. I've been to the downtown east side. I've been to encampments throughout the province. I do go talk to the people that are struggling. I was in Coquitlam recently, talked to folks that were sleeping in a tent there, Honourable Speaker. It's important to have people's lived experiences as part of the solution, Honourable Speaker. That's what we're doing on this side. We have rapidly been expanding supportive housing. We've been rapidly expanding opportunities to get people indoors because we understand that getting people housing is the first and most important step to get them stability, to get them the supports that they need. And so if the member is suggesting that we should go to these communities and hear from people, I can tell the member that we do that. I do that often, and I'm going to continue to do that work, and I welcome any suggestions that the member may have.
Member for Maple Ridge East.
Mr. Speaker, Maple Ridge has about 16,000 children, and the number of $10 a day childcare spaces to support these children is not there. And it is only about 107. So how does the minister expect these many children to share such limited spaces?
Minister of Education.
Honourable Speaker. And I want to thank the member for the question. It's so important as we share a community to continue advocating for childcare for kids all across the province. We here in our government have expanded over 40,000 spaces, funded spaces here in British Columbia. That includes not-for-profit, for-profit, before and after school, and $10 a day. We are continuing to increase our $10 a day spaces. You're going to see over the break week, actually, a whole series of announcements around childcare and new spaces, including $10 a day spaces being opened in a number of places, because we know how important it is to make sure that families have access to safe, licensed, affordable childcare. And we're going to keep investing, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Sunday at 2 a.m., all of us lost an hour of sleep due to the daylight savings time. 93% of British Columbians don't want to continue with this practice, yet this Premier wants to wait for the U.S. before we make a decision about BC for BC. So, Mr. Speaker, how can the Premier claim he is elbows up against becoming the 51st state while allowing the U.S. to dictate how we set our clocks?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I'll say this. There's no question on this side of the House who has their elbows up on being the 51st state, Honourable Speaker. It's this side of the House, because every time the question comes up, there are always those on that side that want to side with the U.S. and Trump.
Member for Kootenay Rockies.
I don't think he answered that question, but I'm going to go to mine. Mr. Speaker, with soaring wait times in Cranbrook and Kimberley, it's clearer now than ever that healthcare professionals need access to the Provincial Rural Retention Incentive. We've canvassed this issue in this House before, but we've got non-answers from this Minister of Health. Let's try this again. See if we can get a straight answer for once. Why won't this minister allow the Provincial Rural Retention Incentive to apply to healthcare professionals who work in Cranbrook and Kimberley? And will she reconsider, yes or no?
Today.
Minister of Health.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question and for speaking up for rural communities. Because, Mr. Speaker, rural communities have suffered more with gaps in their healthcare system, and that's why our government is doing so much work to help address those gaps. Mr. Speaker, we need to strengthen healthcare services across British Columbia. But in rural communities where physician shortages, nursing shortages have led to closures temporarily of emergency rooms, we're seeing how that's impacting those communities. Mr. Speaker, that's why we're taking steps through programs like the Provincial Rural Retention Incentive, like signing bonuses, to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to attract people to come and live in these incredible communities. The members canvassed this question before, and as I've said before, this program is here to incentivize people to move to great places in British Columbia. It is constantly under review, and we are monitoring. There are a set of criteria that are used to determine which communities are. I welcome further conversation with the member. Thank you.
Member for Prince George Valemount.
2024 was devastating. The fire significantly impacted businesses in the resort municipality of Valemount. Valemount now knows that 70% of the businesses will close if they do not receive immediate support. They are asking for $1.5 million to help keep the lights on until the next tourist season. Will the Finance Minister commit to setting this right before the fiscal year ends in 18 days?
Minister of Emergency Management.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Our thoughts are with everybody impacted by the fires last year, particularly the residents of Valemount who so courageously stepped up to support people in need. The businesses, community groups, individuals really took leadership, and I thank them very much for that work. We know that the fires had direct impact for some communities and indirect impacts for others. So I just want to thank the Mayor of Valemount for meeting with me and helping me to understand the impacts to his community. We are working with JEDI and other ministries to make sure that we are helping the community in their recovery. My ministry was able to support a community recovery person to help with that. So I look forward to continuing conversations to better understand the impacts and to support them in their recovery. Thank you.
Member for Prince George Mackenzie.
Mr. Speaker, British Columbia is dead last in business confidence in the entire country. Restaurant bankruptcies have increased 76% the last 2 years. The NDP have failed the hardworking men and women who employ British Columbian workers. Ontario directed their Workers' Compensation Board surplus to be distributed back to businesses through rebates or reduced premiums. In BC, the NDP have only added payroll taxes to small business. Will this Premier direct WorkSafe BC to return any surplus funds to employers?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. I have to say, though, that the premise of the member's question is quite wrong. There is no such thing really as a surplus in the accident fund. The accident fund is in place in order to ensure that there are funds there to protect workers and to provide for the claims and such and supports that workers need when they're injured at work. I want to say, to be clear about this, WorkSafe premiums are lower now than they were in 2014 and have been kept flat under our government. Now, we know that because of global inflation costs for businesses right now, that there are challenges, and we know that Trump's tariff threats are certainly adding additional stress. But we will continue to keep premiums stable so that businesses can afford them and so WorkSafe can continue their obligation to keep workers safe.
Member for Courtney Comox.
Mr. Speaker, weeks ago, I raised the case of Don Chamberlain, who was denied life-saving lung transplant due to staffing shortages. Recently, he got another call. Miraculously, another set of donor lungs became available. He rushed to the ferry, only to learn mid-journey that the transplant had once again fallen through. Despite this heartbreaking outcome, he's still stuck covering travel costs, including the assured loading fee required for urgent transport. As a fellow Islander, the minister knows all too well that BC Ferries is a lifeline, not a cruise line. The travel assistance program requires pre-approval, failing people in urgent cases like this. He deserves better, and so do all British Columbians. Why can't rural British Columbians access essential support for life-saving care?
Minister of Health.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. And I think everyone in this House is sorry to hear that for a second time, this man who is waiting for life-saving treatment has had delays in that care. Mr. Speaker, nothing is more important than getting care for men like Don Chamberlain, and we are going to continue to do everything we can to support him and all the people like him who are waiting for these life-saving surgeries. Mr. Speaker, that's why we've put so much work into attracting specialists, into filling gaps, into increasing training seats, for example, for the perfusionists, the people, as the member knows, who are vital parts of the surgery teams to ensure that operations like this can take place. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to supporting people living in rural communities, I understand. Being a member of a rural community myself and knowing what people go through in terms of the costs and the time that it takes to travel, that's why we're continuing to invest in the travel assistance program, ensuring that people can get that extra help and the lift that they need. I invite the member, and I'm happy to have further conversation with him to understand the specifics of this case and do everything we can to support Mr. Chamberlain. Thank you.
Member for Langley Willowbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crime in Langley is out of control under this soft on crime NDP government. Langley has the highest crime severity index, more than double the provincial average. Langley residents deserve to feel safe. When will this government stop reframing failed policies as new measures and ensure BC's streets are safe for families?
Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. Every British Columbian deserves to feel safe in this province. That's one of our core commitments. That's why we're not only acting to strengthen policing, but also to rebuild the critical services that are required to help offenders beat the system. When they were in office, when you were in office, you cut funding for crime prevention and victim services. You dismantled the prolific offender program, and that resulted in the reoffending rate going up by 40% over 1 year. Our government is reversing that damage. We're making record investments in mental health to break the cycle of crime, including funding for intervention programs and frontline community supports. Mr. Speaker, we know there's more to do, but we're taking action, building safer communities, strengthening prevention, and ensuring British Columbians feel safe in their communities. Thank you.
City Cloverdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Health Minister updated the government's plan for involuntary treatment. And it turns out that despite campaign promises, the NDP will not provide involuntary care that includes long-term addictions treatment. Mr. Speaker, we've heard from families whose children are dying. 13-year-olds dying in tents, multiple overdoses, people in this province getting acquired brain injuries because of their long-term drug use and multiple overdoses. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, is why? Why did the government turn its back on its promise to desperate families to provide involuntary addictions treatment?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. And yes, yesterday was an important day in taking another step forward in addressing the scourge that the toxic drug crisis is and the impacts that it has had on British Columbians, on people, on communities all over. Mr. Speaker,
Yesterday was an important step forward as Dr. Vigo, Chief Scientific Advisor for Psychiatry and the Toxic Drug Crisis, made an important step in providing guidance to clinicians across the province on interpreting the Mental Health Act to help those people, help clinicians make the decisions to support those people who suffer from concurrent disorders, severe mental health issues, severe substance use issues, people with acquired brain injury who are in a situation where they are no longer able to seek treatment themselves and may present an impact to themselves, a danger to themselves and to others around them. Mr. Speaker, that's an important step forward, and we are opening 2 involuntary care facilities to support people like that. But, Mr. Speaker, we continue to invest in voluntary treatment and recovery across the entire spectrum. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to do that work.
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Abbotsford South. Minister will conclude.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to do this incredibly important work, year by year, day by day, hour by hour, building a continuous and seamless system of treatment right from prevention all the way through to treatment and recovery for the people in British Columbia that deserve and need this.
Thank
you.
The bell ends the question period.